different registries,
Mm-hmm.
but they're not using exactly the same lingo. So one says, in the classic one that I show is the num of beds versus number of beds. Programmatically, those are two different things, right?
Exactly.
But the API is about having these systems communicate programmatically. And so we're in, you could say, hey, it's human readable. There's a difference, but then if you said, okay, here it's num beds, here's number of beds, but it points to some kind of data dictionary, and the data dictionary says we're both pointing to the same standard for what that means.
Exactly.
Then programmatically they would know, okay, it's called two different things, but we know these are really the same thing.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, I think we definitely want to have a mechanism to share metadata more easily, right? Just so that short of having standards that dictate how things are coded in a particular country, that there's at least some way to reconcile these things without having to go to the developer, a person at the other end of the system. But then also having some kind of resource that acts as kind of like a terminology service, right, where we know
right
what different things are actually defined as, and being able to have that integrated within architecture, I think would be excellent. Okay, cool. So,
and then I think you yourself came up with an idea that I thought, when it was mentioned, was good, which is, or at least it came out in the discussion, which was, again, it's very flexible, so it allows people to define their own attributes, their own metadata. But to kind of use my own metaphor for your idea, looking at a blank page is a really intimidating thing. Right?
Indeed.
So if you can already pre-populate that page, to use the metaphor, then that would be helpful. So in other words, you just take, let's say we just took an idea and just arbitrarily said, let's define 100 default attributes. They're not required, people don't have to use them, but it's a good starting place for people. And what would those 100 attributes be? And of those, what would be the first 20 that we want to focus on?
Mm-hmm. So are you thinking like in terms of, I mean, it's kind of interestingly, it seems similar to like what Jim through the MFL stuff is doing with some of like the kind of thinking about like what are like core data elements that you would want to see in a registry, for instance. And so, like location, name, all those kind of things. Like, would you envision that as being part of the API or as more a part of the like registry MFL creation process?
I would say that it would just already be there for the API, because it also goes back to this whole issue about how do we communicate metadata correctly between systems.
Okay.
And then I would just say, hey, you know what? Here are 100 already defined attributes in the API that are optional. You can use them or you don't use them. And these are the most 20 common or 100 most common attributes, and here's a data dictionary that we put out defining what they're intended for. And this is, and again, we're talking about how one of the things about the metadata would be that you could point to a data dictionary to show what's defining them. Then say, hey, if this fits your need, use them. If not, don't use them. But at least here's a starting point. And ideally, maybe 80% of the time, all the attributes that you would want are already in there.
Yeah.
And so part of that would be, and so again, so let's find out, so what would those 100 fields or 20 fields be? And that's where in our own experience in Rwanda or Tanzania or whatever, saying, hey, what are some, Kenya already has a guidance document. So they've already defined some attributes for their registry. So looking at some of the attributes already defined for the registries that exist, let's just say, hey, let's go ahead and already implement that in the API. Again, totally not going against the philosophy of the API being flexible and editable, but just to make their jobs easier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you can kind of like easily call upon the the code sets for common data elements, if you will. And I think we can definitely start to review the data specifications for Tanzania and Rwanda. We have them drafted. They're not quite at like a official a publicly official state, which I think is something that as a community we'll try to push for in the next couple months, particularly as like Tanzania gets a little bit more I guess public in their implementation of it, which I think should happen in probably the next month. And then we can kind of like line up those different data specifications, see like, oh yeah, here's the common data elements that we have. Are there any standards that apply to these, whether it's facility type or, types of like administrative hierarchy levels and things like that, to try to associate them with common standards, I think would be, I think that would be a great next step to kind of strengthen the API in terms of, communicating metadata to partners. Okay. Cool, man. That's helpful. Are you at all interested in like getting routine updates from other implementations of the registry or people who are developing apps on top of like a facility registry core?
Yeah, it's always good to know what else other people are doing.
Okay, cool. Because I was thinking that's kind of been, I think we've been pretty strong in like, working on CSD, Connectathon stuff. We put in a lot of work on the API at the beginning of this community, and certainly it'll be a focus moving forward. But I think maybe like the one area that we haven't included much is like bringing in, developers from Tanzania who've developed like the curation app, for instance, for Tanzania, and having them give a little talk about the process that they went through and why, how this is based on requirements in their country and, what it looks like, maybe even giving a little demo. Because I think we'd love to have that as kind of like a routine part of these calls where, people who are working on facility registries in some way can share, like the product of their efforts and in that regard. And, to that length, I think Ed's brought it up before, but, we'd love for, even though we're helping you guys with this, we'd love for you to talk a little bit about the MFL and, how you guys see that moving forward as, one of the stakeholders in the community. So at some point, would you be open to maybe sharing a little bit about MFL and where it's going, or I guess, perhaps after it becomes a little bit more, publicly talked about among PEPFAR, or would you guys be open to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, it's just that right now we're not at that. It's just really interesting. It was a kind of it's just a real problem being able to communicate to all these countries through the PEPFAR channels right now.
Yeah. Well,
but yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we'll put it on kind of like the back burner. Maybe a couple months we could, get that on the schedule. Okay, cool.
Well, it's definitely got a definitive timeline because it needs to be done by this APR 2014, which would be October.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to be one of those cases where it's just going to be a flood. Once it hits, it's just going to be all at once. Yeah.
Yeah. No, definitely. Well, we're looking forward to it. I mean, I think it'll be a nice incentive for, improving facility data in a lot of countries, which will be encouraging.
Yeah, and it's it raises its own questions, which I can only imagine increases when it actually happens, which is, what is a facility?
Yeah.
And then the other question is, do facilities in the registry also include facilities that are not direct service, which I think had come up with, I can't remember the gentleman's name, even in this forum has come up when we had mentioned it, and I described a little bit about our endeavor, asked if, non-service delivery places were going to get implemented in the registry.
Yeah.
And I'd mentioned, as far as PEPFAR is concerned, the definition of a facility is just any place which is receiving funding. And so, yes, we would want to know about any place, even if it's not a direct service. For example, if it's a radio station that's receiving funding for doing public service announcements, that's not a direct benefit to a patient, but nevertheless it does have an impact on the community as far as the objective, which is perhaps increase awareness and get more people to go get treatment, things like that. Then we would want to be aware of that facility. Now, that might be of a totally different opinion of the national government or Ministry of Health.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what it'll come down to is, sometimes, there's kind of like, push and pull requirements for like why someone wants a particular kind of information. And I think there's like authentic demand for, wanting to know where, like the clinics and hospitals where health services are provided.
Right, absolutely.
Like directly to a patient. And I think your kind of dichotomy there is right on, where there's also like locations, right, that provide some type of service related to health. Maybe it's more like public health related, like a radio tower or an administrative office. Some people,
or even a school.
Yeah, go ahead.
They would. I don't know if they did this at your school, but every once in a while they would come to our school and we would donate blood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that's like almost a type of mobile clinic or something, right?
Right.
Or temporary, short-term or repeating, once a day kind of thing. And so there's all kinds of like different ways to, skim and slice it. But it also came up in Rwanda, I believe, with like dispensaries, private dispensaries who, they're not necessarily like having doctors see patients, but they, share medicines, and there's, a lot of interest in tracking that from like a supply chain standpoint. And so I think as like additional use cases come up, like we start to broaden our concept of locations where some type of service related to health is occurring, and certainly having a registry to store that in an MFL that standardizes it is of considerable value. It'll be interesting, like what PEPFAR sees as its like base requirements, right? And I think what it'll end up being is places where that are receiving some kind of support from PEPFAR that need to be reported against, which probably will be pretty broad, probably more broad than maybe some countries are ready to. But it might be a good impetus to start to collect that data and figure out where all the schools and radio towers and dispensaries and other administrative buildings are that in some form are receiving funding from PEPFAR.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it's a nice use case to kind of like promote the discussion of it and start to thinking, you're broadening the conversation to more of like a health systems kind of conversation as opposed to just where the doctors and nurses that provide care directly to patients.
Right, exactly, and that's the thing. I think you hit it on the head. It's just a matter of having that conversation, because I certainly don't have any answers, and it's not really for me to give answers as concerns that. But it's definitely something that people should talk about. Mm-hmm. And what is the implication for a registry?
Are there some other like, I don't know, are there things like school registries that could be called upon to describe the health services provided at a school? I'm not necessarily sure of the answer to that, or how broad do you want an MFL to really be, or is there some kind of separation there? But yeah, there's definitely increasing levels of facility types. Facilities just being locations that we want to standardize their identification about. And I don't know, maybe we also need to think a little bit about our terminology too, about what we really see as the scope for these things that we want to the systems to be able to support.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I know that just as an example, as far as promise is concerned, and real world example of how it's used, there are basically two means of reporting data, and that's facility based and then what's called non-facility. Mm-hmm. And so facility based, you would actually go in for specific indicators, such as what's P11D, which is prevention of mother-to-child transmission, and basically just how many women have you counseled and were aware of their like HIV status. Yeah. Right. And that one you can report at a facility level, where you would say, I picked this region, I picked this district, and at St. Mary's Hospitals, and for P11D it was 10 women. Mm-hmm. But you can also, for the non-facility based, and there's a huge it's amazing how much debate there can be over a word, back and forth, and they just decided that it's basically they thought about maybe calling them community indicators, but they just decided it's just not a facility.
Okay.
And they could report that they select the region and the district, but they don't pick a particular place, just the district.
Mm-hmm.
And then they would assign an activity, and that might be what took into account, ad campaigns, awareness campaigns, all the other things that would happen, not in a particular place, but at least in a particular district or region.
Okay. So you guys might not actually need to know like the GPS location of where that radio station is or that radio tower is for that particular example.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So that's where let's see, I'm looking at the and speaking of what the things I was talking about was basically the extended properties of the API.
Mm-hmm.
And so the facility looking at the API right now, you can update a facility, you can get a facility, and it does have, does it have, I don't see wherein I would know its geopolitical hierarchy.
I think that's one of the core attributes. Hold on, let me check real quick. I'm just opening it up.
I mean, there's a name, there's an href, a UUID, whether it's active, created, updated, its coordinates, identifiers, and then that's it. And so this almost goes back to the communication to promise, where we specified, hey, not only do you have to meet this, here's the format that we need you guys to communicate the facilities to promise, but in addition to that, we need you to be able to tell us, is this a geopolitical area? And then it would have a little flag.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think how this is intended to operate is like in the properties category, right? Where you could have anything from like how many beds are there to, what kind of equipment and that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Is that like the hierarchy information is right, like the metadata is stripped out of the hierarchy, right? And what would be reported as a property is the node within a hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's actually kind of comes back to our first conversation on sharing metadata more easily. But so I think that's like how the administrative divisions would be transmitted via the FRED API currently. But obviously the improvement we would want to make is, well, how do I know necessarily like where that node in a hierarchy that you're using in a registry or in some other system like sits within an approved metadata for administrative divisions for that hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like necessarily like ingrained within the data that's being shared, but could be referenced in some way by sharing the metadata for that particular property. And maybe I think like the ideal scenario is that there's like a terminology service or something that like shares certain types of code sets in the future. Mm-hmm. And a facility registry could call on that terminology service for the standardized administrative hierarchy, share the property through the FRED API, and it's easy to go and then reference like the approved admin divisions in the future. But in the current, it's just that metadata is being stored within the registry itself, and that would be like the source of the metadata that you would then want to interpret that property node for an admin division. So I think like it's right. Certainly. It's intentionally designed as like super simple and flexible right now, and part of what we really want to do is take a lot of the learnings from the different apps that have been made and a lot of the work that's been done to improve the sharing of metadata and certainly like some of the security stuff as well. So
so I would just say, just posing that question of, well, how do I, because this really just concentrates just on the nodes, and I know that and I know that this came up in a conversation previously about just having like a default hierarchy, but that resource map can handle multiple hierarchies, can handle an administrative hierarchy, can handle the geopolitical hierarchy, for the same node.
Mm-hmm.
But just being able to discover that, because if I wanted my system, again, part of this is being able to look at other systems consuming this registry. Let's say I wanted to create an application, and all I wanted to do was have it point to the facility registry in Kenya and give me a series of drop-downs such that I could drill down to the facility considering the official administrative hierarchy they have.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at this API and thinking that that's possible.
Yeah,
Now, that might be because I have to look at another thing like the CSD or something else, but from this, I wouldn't be able to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're just consuming the API, right, like you wouldn't necessarily know the structure of the metadata associated with an admin hierarchy. So, yeah, I think that'll be a nice next kind of step for the FRED API. Probably will be, how do we communicate the metadata through the API so that there's an easy mechanism to interpret the property nodes that you're consuming through it.
Right, because just looking at this, I would know that I have 4,000 unique facilities in Kenya, and I would have lat longs, but I wouldn't have anything that I would be. Most people don't interact with that kind of data in a lat long fashion. They generally kind of drill down based on some kind of administrative hierarchy.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, so I think we would just want to make sure that it was included in the properties, and
or that if that's not the responsibility of the facility registry, then what does have that responsibility? How would I consume that?
Mm-hmm.
Like, is that the CSD, or is this like who owns the different hierarchies?
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily. Maybe CSD would help kind of facilitate that. I think really like the ideal state, right, would be that there's a terminology service, and this terminology service essentially just like stores code sets and then distributes them and standardizes them across all the registries and systems within a health information exchange. Mm-hmm. And I think the only issue now is like that subcomponent of OHIE is still kind of like getting up and running and considering what their architectures will be, and it's a bit in progress. So until that happens, we want the registries to also be able to share that metadata as well that's stored within the registry. And at some point, right, the registry will get updated by the terminology service as those code sets change. And obviously, okay, like as much as we can standardize all code sets against existing standards that match what a country needs, then that'll also be able to like improve the overall interoperability of the systems and stuff. But yeah, so I think like right now, like if you wanted to do it today, right, like where you said, hey, I want to consume an API from a registry and see the the property for administrative divisions in a country, and then also interpret that with the metadata, I think you'd have to use the native API through resource map. But in the future, we want to incorporate that into the FRED API so that it can be standardized for any facility registry that's created in any country, and
right,
and is a bit more it's not like isolated to one tool. It's actually incorporated back into the open source API that can be instantiated amongst any tool. So
yeah, because then if you think about it, like for example, using the defined output that I did for Promise for the interchange of the facility reconciliation tool to Promise,
yeah,
that by its definition does allow you to recreate that hierarchy. But if I was to output it purely in this FRED API compliant mode without creating my own custom property, it's not there. It's not going to tell me how that works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, exactly. Okay, well, we'll get that on the list of things to work on and improve in the coming months as we start to I think probably our goals for the next 3 months are going to be to really focus on doing some of these demos and bringing some more of the implementation side into these meetings, mm-hmm, and then also taking the learnings that we've had from starting to develop some of these apps and some of the limitations that we found in the 1.0 version of FRED API, and starting to improve that in kind of like a community and consensus-driven way. Because we definitely want people to kind of see the value in changes that are being done to it, and not like over specify things for one particular partner over another, but keep it something that can be used across multiple partners in different situations, and keep it flexible and reusable. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, and that's exactly. Well, I'm trying to coach the example and the terminology of one system trying to talk to another, and how do you get that so that's understandable to somebody using that system? Because otherwise, right now, it's just a list.
Yeah, exactly. And so you need to there's some kind of effort required to consume that list, right? Which
right.
Isn't ideal by any means. All right, cool, man. Well, hey, any other things that you would love to see in the kind of coming 3 to 6 months for the community, or stuff that you think we can do better? Of course.
Other than what I've mentioned, no, that's it. I hope they're helpful comments.
Oh no, they're definitely helpful. It's actually kind of nice to see. There's actually some pretty nice alignment between different people who've been engaged in the community, and I think the things you're asking for are spot on with what a lot of other people are hoping to have too. So yeah, it's definitely nice to hear that.
Good.
Cool, man. Well, hey, anything else you want to chat about? You want to chat a little bit about MFL stuff at all? I know we have a check-in later today on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know if there's any other things you'd want to focus on.
Let's see. We'll probably. No, I think that's well. And I think next week we're looking at possibly having a demo of 2, possibly 3 of the features.
Yes, I believe that's correct. So, I think for sure 1, maybe both. It'll just kind of depend on how quickly our devs can go through and get something deployed for that. But yeah, we're looking forward to that. I think. Which the one I can remember for sure was the improved search capabilities, and then the second one, I think, was changing the display of the data into a table format. I believe I might be misremembering that, but I know Nico and our devs are actively working on it, and we're looking forward to sharing that with you guys. So
yeah, cool.
All right, man. Well, in that case, why don't we wrap up a little bit early here? And
okay.
Yeah, I'll unless there's anything else, but I'll try to probably send out some of these kind of surveys and things like that, and to gauge interest among the other members of the community, and then we can put together a little bit of a prospective plan for 2014 here for the community.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, great, Jorge. Well, I'll talk to you a little bit on that other call that we have. Otherwise, it was good chatting for a bit.
Same.
All right.